In 1978, Van Halen toured with Black Sabbath as their opening act. Every night, Van Halen stole the show. Everybody, including Ozzy, saw how amazing Eddie was on guitar. So, after that, Ozzy and Black Sabbath parted ways. Ozzy had to form his own group. He was looking for a guitar player. The next best thing to Eddie was Gary Moore back in the day. Gary knew how to do tapping and things which Eddie did on guitar, but Gary didn't want to join Ozzy. He wanted to do his own thing. So, eventually, Ozzy found Randy, who could also do things on guitar which Eddie did. 1979, Gary Moore moved to Los Angeles and he was getting together his own band, G-Force. Ozzy and Gary were on the same label, Jet Records, run by Sharon's father, Don Arden. Apparently, Don Arden wanted Ozzy and Gary to work together and push Ozzy to get Gary in the band. Gary later said that he and his band felt sorry for Ozzy. Ozzy was always hovering around and trying to get him, but Gary didn't want to because Ozzy's reputation with drugs and alcohol, being unreliable and unprofessional. And Gary said to Ozzy, I'll help you find a guitarist, or if you find a guitarist and you want my opinion, I'll help you with it. So his G-Force band was helping Ozzy to audition musicians. If drummers were trying out, Gary played guitar. And if a bassist came along, Gary's drummer would help out. Gary and Ozzy became good friends ever since. After Randy got the gig, they all went to England to rehearse. So that's when Randy met Gary Moore for the first time. Randy was aware of Thin Lizzy, and he just fell in love with Gary Moore's solo work like Parisian Walkways and his guitar tone. According to Randy Rhoads' friend, Rudy Sarzo, later on, Randy came to really admire Gary Moore and Eddie Van Halen. Those were his two top guys. Actually, drummer Tommy Aldridge was rehearsing with Gary Moore when Randy came in. Randy was with Ozzy and they came to meet Gary. While there, Randy picked up a guitar and started jam with them for about an hour because Randy was a big Gary Moore fan. I don't know how big, but big enough to come down to the rehearsal to meet Gary, said Aldridge. Tommy Aldridge moved to London, England in 1981. He worked with Gary Moore and they recorded the Dirty Fingers album. Keyboardist Don Airey was also in Gary Moore's band at the time. When Randy Rhoads arrived to England to record with Ozzy, he and Bob Daisley went to watch Gary Moore's band rehearse. Aldridge and Rhoads became friends immediately. Aldridge had known Ozzy for several years, as Black Oak, Arkansas has toured with Black Sabbath extensively in the 70s. So, Aldridge's new friendship with Rhoads would lead him to join Osborne's band a few months later. Although Aldridge is credited in the liner notes and pictured on the inner sleeves of Osborne's 1981 album Diary of a Madman, Lee Kerslake actually performed on all the drum parts on the original release. Aldridge has stated that working with Rhoads in Osborne's band was one of the musical highlights of his life. Rhoads stated of Aldridge in late 1981, he was always my favorite drummer, saying that he was knocked out by Aldridge after seeing him perform with Black Oak, Arkansas on television in the 70s. So later, Tommy Aldridge recalled about his first meeting with Randy. This is what he said. It scared me to death. It was inspirational. It was life-changing. Not only from a musician standpoint, the first time I met Randy, he came to rehearsal when I was rehearsing with Gary. He was a big Gary Moore fan, as most Les Paul players are, I think. He came to our rehearsal, and that's when I met him. He was really in awe of Gary and Gary's tone. Many years later, Gary Moore commented on his relationship with Randy Rhoads. Gary said, I got to know Randy pretty well when he came to England to join Ozzy's band. In fact, I remember him asking me if I thought it was a worthwhile gig, and he laughs. I told him to give it a few years and see what happens. He was so sweet and he was a great little player. He was so fiery and he really took the instrument seriously. I was incredibly sad when I heard what happened to him because it was such a dumb thing. It should have never happened. They called me the day after Randy died and asked me to replace him on the tour, but I was too upset. It's tragic to think of what Randy would have done. Same thing with Stevie Ray. The two of them should be kings of the guitar right now. In another interview, Gary said the following about his meeting with Randy. I did know Randy when he joined Ozzy. What happened was I was living in Los Angeles getting a band called G-Force together at the time, and Ozzy was living in a hotel. He'd been kicked out of Black Sabbath and he tried to get a band together. Now, the guitarist he wanted in his band was me. I know that for a fact because he kept trying and trying and trying, but I really didn't want to do it. I just left Thin Lizzy. I didn't want to get back in the situation where somebody might be a little bit less sober than they should. And Ozzy even said that to me. I know I drive you mad, Gary replied. Yes, I've just left Thin Lizzy. I can't bear that anymore, but I'll help you find a guitarist, or if you find a guitarist and you want my opinion, I'll help you with it. So we used to audition people for him. My band would go to studio, and if it was a bass player, I'd set up with the bass player. If that was a guitarist, and my bass player and drummer would play with the guitarist. And so we helped him to get the band together. Eventually, they found Randy. I wasn't there when they found Randy. He found Randy in Los Angeles, and then they came over to rehearse. So Gary watched them rehearsing. Then Randy went up to me and said, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing here. Randy was apprehensive about the whole thing because he was studying classical guitar, and actually, I think he felt it was interrupting his studies in a way. I said, No, no, it is great for you, man. You got to do this. I think I gave him the right advice, but funny thing was he came to see me in the Marquee Club one night. We played Parisian Walkways. He turned around to Sharon and said, That should be a single. It would be a single like 3 years before. He didn't realize that. And he actually incorporated some of that melody into Mr. Crowley. There's a bit. Listen to the solo. He kind of incorporated a bit into that. He's a lovely guy. He was a really, really nice kid, really sweet guy, and a great guitar player. A great guitar player. So in England, Gary, Randy, Bob, and Ozzy all went to shows and hung out together. They had a good time. I mean, how cool is that? After the tragic death of Randy Rhoads in a plane crash in 1982, Gary Moore wrote an instrumental song called Sunset. Sunset was recorded in a studio in 1982 for Cozy Powell's Tilt album. Don Airey played keyboards on it. Gary Moore performed the song live in Tokyo, Japan in 1983, where he said, Don Airey and I would like to dedicate the song to Randy Rhoads. Gary Moore and Ozzy were very good friends. They even wrote a song together called Lead Clones for Gary Moore's seventh solo studio album, After the War, released in 1989. Ozzy later said, Lead Clones pokes fun at bands such as Kingdom Come, who were popular at the time and based on a Led Zeppelin type sound and image. The song was great fun, and it was an honor to record with Gary. When Gary Moore died, Ozzy said, I knew Gary Moore for what seemed like forever. We'd run into each other many times over the years, and we were always able to pick up right where we left off. I had the honor of recording with Gary on his After the War album on the track Lead Clones, which was great fun. To say that his death was tragic loss doesn't seem to give it justice it deserves. We've lost a phenomenal musician and a great friend. Rest in peace, Gary.